I was never meant to be part of their world, and they made sure I knew it. My name is Emily Harris, and at 32 years old, I had spent my entire life trying to make my parents proud. The trouble was, no matter what I did, it was never enough. I wasn't the perfect daughter, the one who excelled in school, or who fit the mold of their expectations. To them, I was just nothing. But things were about to change. I had spent years letting their words cut deeper, believing that maybe, just maybe, I was the problem. That maybe I hadn't tried hard enough to earn their love and respect. I was wrong. The moment I realized how much I had been under their control was the moment I decided to take charge of my own life. It wasn't the insults or the disregard that got to me, though. It was the realization that they didn't see me as a person worthy of love, just a tool to be used. My parents had always made it clear, when it came to anything important, I didn't matter. They wanted their perfect little family, and I didn't fit in. But when I walked into that room, holding that one piece of paper, the one they feared the most, their world began to fall apart. They'd underestimated me, believed I'd always just take whatever scraps they gave me. They didn't realize that I had been planning for this moment for years. As I stood there, staring them down, I could feel the weight of their words echoing in my mind. Nothing. That's all I had been to them. But now I was the one holding all the power. I'd finally taken control of my life. They never thought I'd have the courage to fight back, but that was exactly what I was doing. And they were going to regret underestimating me. I had always known something was off, but I never wanted to face the truth. It wasn't until I got that letter, that document, that I knew I had been right all along. My entire life, I had lived in the shadows of my family's expectations, quietly working hard to earn their approval. But all I ever got in return were whispers behind my back, a constant reminder that I was never enough. I thought I had moved on from it. I thought I could be content just existing in their world, never fully belonging, but always showing up. I was wrong. When I first found out what they were doing, I couldn't believe it. My parents, the people who raised me, had been actively undermining my efforts for years. And I had no idea. My dad, the man I had once looked up to, had always made it clear that my achievements meant nothing compared to my brothers. "You should be more like him," he'd say. I'd nod, always trying to make sense of why my own accomplishments never seemed to matter. My mom, too, had a way of dismissing my feelings. She would pretend everything was fine, but I saw the way her eyes would glaze over whenever I spoke about my dreams. I began to see the pattern, the quiet disregard that had been there for as long as I could remember. It wasn't until I sat down with that document in my hands that I realized how deep the betrayal went. The legal paper in front of me confirmed it. My parents had been quietly siphoning away money meant for my future, all the while telling me I was nothing. The document, the one I had never expected to find, was proof of everything they had done behind my back. My heart raced as I sat there, staring at the stark reality of their actions. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was the pawn in a game they had been playing for years. I hadn't even known I was part of it. But now, armed with this knowledge, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to let them treat me like this anymore. I wasn't going to be ignored or manipulated any longer. I stood up, paper in hand, ready to face them. This time, they wouldn't get away with it. It wasn't just the shock of the document. It was the realization that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. I spent the next few days staring at the paper, unable to believe it, but knowing deep down that it was true. The weight of it all crushed me. How could my parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, do something like this? I thought about all the years I had spent trying to gain their approval. All the moments I had sacrificed for the sake of keeping the peace. I had worked harder than anyone, tried to be the perfect daughter, but none of it had mattered. My parents had used me as a stepping stone to get what they wanted. The love I thought I was earning was just an illusion. I didn't even want to be in their world anymore. The more I thought about it, the clearer everything became. They never saw me as anything more than a tool for their success. I wasn't their daughter. I was a means to an end. The anger started to burn inside me, not at them, but at myself for letting this go on for so long. For years, I had let them define me, shape me into something I wasn't. I had let their voices tell me who I should be, what I should do, and what I was worth. but no more. I had the power now. I had the document in my hand, proof of their betrayal, and that was all I needed to take control of my own life. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had been strong all along, and now I was ready to show them who I really was. The moment I decided, that was the moment everything changed. I no longer cared about their opinions. It didn't matter how many years I had spent trying to fit into their world. What mattered now was taking my life back, and I was going to do it, no matter the cost. As the days passed, I felt the weight of the decision I had made settle deeper within me. I wasn't going to be their puppet anymore. I started making plans quietly, carefully. I wasn't going to confront them with anger or rage. No, I had something far stronger, the truth. The truth they had hidden for so long, believing that I would never find it. I couldn't just let this go. Not after everything. I had spent my life trying to gain their approval, doing everything they asked of me, and yet they had never once thought I was worth their time. It hit me harder than I expected, realizing that the only time I had mattered to them was when I served their needs. All the years of putting my dreams aside, of becoming someone I wasn't just to be accepted, were now clear to me. I had been suffocating in their expectations, their judgments, their constant disappointment. But now I had the power. That document wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my weapon. It was everything they feared. It wasn't about getting revenge. It was about taking back my life. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't going to let them control me any longer. I had spent too much of my life trying to be something I wasn't, and it was time to stop. I had learned the hard way that nothing would change unless I took the reins. And I wasn't going to waste any more time waiting for them to finally realize my worth. I walked into that room, holding the paper in my hands, my heart racing but steady. They couldn't ignore me now. Not with the proof of everything they had tried to keep hidden. This wasn't just a fight for respect. It was for my freedom. The freedom to finally be me. To no longer let them dictate who I was. I was done being the girl who always tried to please them. Now, I was the woman who would stand up for herself, no matter the cost. As I stood there, holding that document in my hand, the room felt heavier than it ever had before. My parents, who had always seemed so certain in their judgments, sat in front of me, eyes avoiding mine. For so long, I had been afraid to show them that I knew the truth. Afraid to expose the lies they had carefully crafted over the years. But now, with the weight of this paper in my hand, I no longer feared them. I wasn't the same person who had been silenced for so long. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more aware of my own worth. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could feel the tension, the way my parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, knowing that something had changed. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to cry for their love. I had finally realized that I didn't need either of those things to be whole. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. My father glanced at my mother, his eyes narrowing as if he was trying to piece it all together. He didn't want to believe it, but I could see the truth in his eyes. They both knew. They knew what they had done, and now I had the proof. My mother, who had always been so cold, looked at me with a mixture of guilt and fear. For the first time, I saw her vulnerability. It wasn't enough, though. It wasn't enough for all the years I had spent watching them dismiss me, overlook me, and treat me like I didn't matter. I wasn't angry. No, I had moved beyond anger. This was about something far more important, about standing up for myself and reclaiming the power they had stolen from me. "I'm not your pawn," I said quietly but firmly. "I won't play your game anymore." The words felt liberating, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. I was done living in the shadows of their expectations. I had found my own voice, and nothing they could say would ever change that. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was empowering. I had taken back control. The only thing left to do now was to walk away from this moment, knowing that I had finally found my own strength. The moment I left their house, something inside me shifted. I felt a rush of clarity, as if the fog I had been living under for years had finally lifted. I had walked into that room, terrified, vulnerable, unsure of what would happen next. But now I felt stronger than I ever had before. I didn't need their approval anymore, I didn't need their love, and I certainly didn't need to follow their rules. I had my own path to walk. The days that followed were a blur of relief and quiet triumph. I kept my distance from them, not because I hated them, but because I needed the space to breathe. I couldn't continue to be a part of their toxic world. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I would catch myself thinking about reaching out to them, about apologizing for whatever they thought I had done wrong. But those thoughts quickly faded when I remembered how long I had suffered in silence. I had spent so many years waiting for them to recognize my worth, but I was done waiting. I had given them every opportunity to love me, to see me, to accept me. Now it was my turn to accept myself. I spent a lot of time reflecting, processing everything that had happened. It was like peeling back layers of an onion, revealing the truth underneath. The truth was ugly, but it was also liberating. I wasn't broken, I wasn't weak, and I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. And the more I embraced that truth, the more I realized how much strength I had inside me. I had been the one holding myself back all this time, not them. The world didn't owe me anything, and I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I had everything I needed within myself. As the weeks passed, I started making plans. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to live my life on my own terms. No more pretending to be someone I wasn't. No more trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me. I was going to create a life that was all mine. My parents might never understand, and that was fine. What mattered was that I understood myself. I was finally free. It wasn't until I started seeing the changes in myself that I realized just how much I had been holding back. I began to notice the little things, the way I stood a little taller, how I no longer apologized for simply taking up space, how I started to dream again, freely, without fear of judgment. There were no more constant reminders that I was nothing. Every day felt like a quiet rebellion against the years I had spent as a ghost in my own life. It was strange, but also exhilarating. I had spent so much of my life looking for approval, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me, and now I was finally free to be myself. It wasn't just about walking away from my family, it was about walking away from the version of me they had created. I started making choices based on what I wanted, not what I thought they expected of me. It was difficult at first. There were moments when I felt like I was drifting, unsure of where I was headed or if I was making the right decisions. But as time passed, I began to trust myself more. I started to surround myself with people who saw me for who I truly was, not for who I was supposed to be. I made new friends, people who valued me and respected me. It was an experience I hadn't known before, the simple joy of being accepted for exactly who I was. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to change myself to fit in. I could just be Emily. The emotional weight of the past still lingered, but it wasn't as heavy anymore. I had let go of the need to be validated by people who would never see me as I truly was. It was like stepping out of a cage I hadn't even realized I had been trapped in. And as the months went by, I felt myself becoming stronger, more confident. I had found my voice, not through confrontation, but through quiet determination. I no longer needed to prove myself. I wasn't defined by anyone's opinion but my own. And that, in itself, was freedom. The day I finally took control was a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. There was a part of me that expected everything to fall apart. I had walked away from my family, from everything I had ever known, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice. But as I settled into this new chapter of my life, I realized just how much I had been holding myself back. I had lived for so long under the shadow of their expectations, constantly trying to prove my worth, but now I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I was allowed to just be. For the first time, I found myself focusing on what truly mattered to me. My life wasn't defined by my family anymore. It was my own to live, to shape, to change. I took up things I had always wanted to do, but had been too scared to pursue. I signed up for a painting class, something I had dreamed about for years, but never felt worthy enough to try. I began writing, pouring my thoughts into pages that no one would ever read, but that were mine to keep. The world didn't have to see me a certain way anymore. I could be Emily, the version of myself that was raw, unfiltered, and free. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness crept in, when I missed the comfort of family dinners and the facade of normalcy that I had clung to for so long. But I learned to sit with the discomfort, to acknowledge it without letting it control me. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, and yet I realized I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. With each passing day, the weight of the past seemed to lift just a little more. I no longer felt like a shadow in my own life. I had stepped into the light, even if it was only for myself. It didn't matter if my family ever understood. What mattered was that I had finally understood myself. I was not defined by their opinions or their expectations. I was finally free. The day I decided to finally take the next step was the day I realized I had been waiting for permission my entire life. Permission from my parents, from my family, from the world. But that day, I stopped asking. I stopped waiting for validation. I had learned that my worth was not defined by anyone but myself. The journey of self-discovery wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As I moved forward, I realized that I had been carrying so much unnecessary weight, the kind of weight that wasn't mine to bear. For years, I had been living under the pressure of being someone I wasn't, someone who didn't reflect who I truly was. And when I finally let go of that, I felt lighter, freer. The emotional shackles that had bound me to my family's expectations started to fade. It was incredible how much energy I had wasted trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me. I started feeling excited again, excited for the future, for the endless possibilities ahead. I spent more time with myself, doing the things I had put off for years because I didn't think I deserved them. I went on long walks, I painted, I read books I had always wanted to dive into but had never found the time for. I started to notice the little things, the beauty in the small moments, the feeling of peace that came with truly being alone. It wasn't loneliness, it was solitude. And it felt right. I began to see life differently. I wasn't bound by the chains of my family's opinions. The world was mine to explore. The more I embraced this new freedom, the more I realized that it wasn't just about escaping my past. It was about stepping into a new version of myself. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was running toward the person I had always been meant to be. The journey wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. But those moments were fewer, and they no longer had the power to control me. I had learned to trust myself. And that was enough. I no longer needed anyone's approval to move forward. I was enough. And that, in itself, was the most powerful thing I had ever discovered. As I continued down this new path, I realized that the person I had always been was no longer who I was becoming. The transformation was subtle at first, like a small crack in a mirror that slowly expanded until the entire reflection changed. It wasn't just my actions that were different, it was the way I saw myself. I started trusting my instincts more, listening to that quiet voice inside me that had been drowned out for so long. I no longer sought validation from others. I didn't need it. The world had a way of making you feel small, of telling you that you weren't enough unless you conformed. But now I knew the truth. I was enough, exactly as I was. It was a liberating feeling, knowing that I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into anyone else's expectations. I began to explore new opportunities. The idea of taking risks didn't feel as scary anymore. I started thinking about what I wanted, not what I thought I should want. There was a certain freedom in making decisions based on my own desires, without the weight of anyone else's opinions on my shoulders. I began meeting new people, people who saw me for who I really was, not the version I had been forced to become. For the first time in my life, I felt truly understood, and it felt good. These new connections didn't feel like obligations or expectations, they felt real. They made me realize that I had spent far too much time trying to please people who would never understand me. But that wasn't my burden anymore. I wasn't going to keep carrying it. I found that I was able to look at my family, at my past, without resentment or anger. What they had done to me was no longer something I needed to hold on to. It was just a chapter of my life, a chapter that had closed. The real journey was the one I was on now, the one where I got to choose my own story. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. And it felt like I had just begun to truly understand what that meant. It wasn't until I started taking these small, but important steps that I realized just how far I had come. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of what the future might bring. The fear that had once held me back, fear of failure, of rejection, of not being enough, began to fade. What replaced it wasn't a sense of certainty, but something much more valuable, a deep trust in myself. I had spent so many years questioning my worth, feeling like I wasn't deserving of the things I wanted. But now, that belief was gone. I had learned that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. The approval I had once sought so desperately was no longer necessary for my happiness. I didn't need to be anyone else. I was enough, just as I was. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild my life, not just in the practical sense, but in the emotional and mental sense. I took time to nurture myself, to do the things I had always wanted to do, but had never had the courage to pursue. I started taking dance classes, something I had dreamed about for years, but had always put off. I traveled solo to places I had only seen in pictures, learning to enjoy my own company. I read books that challenged me, both intellectually and emotionally, opening my mind to new perspectives. The more I did these things, the more I realized how much I had been holding myself back. And every time I made a choice based on my own desires, I felt a sense of power that I had never experienced before. I was becoming the person I had always wanted to be, the person I was always meant to be. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be days when the old fears would creep back in, when doubts would resurface. But I had learned to face those moments with strength and clarity. I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to be anything but myself. And that was enough. Looking back now, I can see how much I had underestimated my own strength. It wasn't just about leaving behind my family or stepping into the unknown. It was about finally seeing myself clearly, without the distorted lens they had placed over my life. I had spent so many years believing I wasn't enough, that I had to prove myself over and over again. But once I stopped seeking their approval, I realized that my worth was never theirs to decide. It was mine. The journey wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Every moment of self-doubt, every setback, every moment of fear was part of the process. And as hard as it was, each one of those moments taught me something valuable. I was stronger than I had ever known. I no longer looked at my family and felt the weight of their judgments bearing down on me. Instead, I saw them for what they were, flawed people who had their own struggles and whose views of me were never the truth of who I was. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had learned to give it to myself. I had walked away from a life I thought I had to live, and in doing so, I had created a new one where I was free to make my own decisions, follow my own path, and embrace my own power. I could finally breathe, fully and deeply. There was peace in this new life. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was mine. And that was enough. The world around me no longer defined my worth. I did. And for the first time, I felt at home in my own skin. I had taken back control of my life, and nothing, not even the memories of how things used to be, could take that away from me.